So we published a study in '91 to show that we know that it's possible to actually make more progress in skills, because we took a dozen kids and we published how we took these a dozen kids and made large gains in literacy skills, about 3 to 5 grade levels in about 9 to 10 weeks. So we did intensive instruction, 4 to 6 hours a day, 5 days a week of one-on-one instruction to see, does high intensity, high frequency instruction really change the skills? Because if you can't do it in high intensity, high frequency, then there's no point in using that method in a classroom, which is not high intensity and is not high frequency. From this study, then we published another set of 5-year study. This was taking kids who are 8 to 10 years old, who are already in special ed. They all have IEPs and they all have diagnosis of dyslexia. And they're not progressing. What's the success rate of special ed? 5% of kids make enough improvement to leave special ed. 95% of children will stay in special ed for the rest of their life, which means what special ed is doing sounds logical. Let's give Johnny what Johnny needs, and give Sally what she needs, and give Jimmy what he needs. But what we're giving them has not actually been proven to be effective, so we're basically just kind of guessing and randomly trying different things. And it's not very effective. So much so that here's the data from Gainesville, Florida, which is Alachua County Public Schools. And this is 30 kids, and this is how much growth they made in 16 months of special ed. They came in scoring about the 10th percentile, and 16 months later, where are they? They're still at the 10th percentile. Then we took those kids and put them into this evidence-based program that goes back to the speech processing first, building phonology, then building decoding skills, then you get to sight words, then you get to book reading. It has a whole developmental hierarchy, and here's the growth we made in 8 weeks. They've made several grade levels of gain in 8 weeks' time. This is what we call a dosage study. We then stopped the instruction, not because they were done, but because every kid could only get 80 hours of instruction, and then we had to stop. The question we were asking was, how much progress do kids make if they only get 80 hours of instruction? Why do we stop at 80 hours? Because we only had $1 million, and that's all it could afford us to provide. You'd think $1 million would go a lot farther, but when you got 30 kids in this group and 30 kids in this group, doing testing before and testing after, and testing 1 year after, testing 2 years after, the money goes very quickly. But the real question here was, but what happens when you stop the instruction? The answer was, their skills got even stronger 1 year after instruction had ended. And the answer was, and 2 years later, they're still getting stronger. Because like a typically developing child, when you've given them all the phonological processing skills they need, they've got really strong comprehension skills, the more they use them, what happens? The stronger they become. That's what happens for kids who don't have dyslexia, don't have reading skills. This was their change in their ability to sound out words. The prior graph was their reading comprehension. They came in decoding words at the 5th percentile, and 8 weeks later, with 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, up to 80 hours of instruction, we had them decoding at the 45th percentile. And then 1 year later, the skills start to dip down, but they still stay at grade level. 2 years later, now they're starting to curve back up, which tells us that probably 80 hours isn't enough to really solidify those decoding skills, but it didn't let it drop back to where they were before treatment. So it was enough to build a functional change, but it just is going to slowly take more progress to get it to continue to grow at the same rate. So then we published another 5-year study. It's another $1 million project. This was conducted in Tallahassee. We screened 1,500 5-year-olds. We pulled out 160 kids who were in the bottom 12% on phonological awareness. We then gave 40 of them nothing, because legally and ethically we're allowed to do that, because nobody knew if you actually change these skills for these kids. And we followed them for 2 years. We found out that a large percentage don't pass kindergarten or 1st grade, and it looks like this. If you do nothing, 41% don't pass kindergarten or 1st grade. If you take 40 kids who are equally at risk and equally strong IQs and strong vocabularies and give them an extra one-on-one time with whatever the teacher's doing, because maybe the method doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is that you're personally instructing them and giving them some personal time. It actually doesn't matter. 30% still don't pass kindergarten or 1st grade, and there's no difference between the RCS and the NT group. Whether you do nothing or do a little extra one-on-one, statistically it's not going to be a big difference in the outcomes. The third group was explicit phonics, systematic, structured, synthetic phonics. And what we found was, if it's not good enough just to give them one-on-one time, maybe the program matters to what you're doing, so we should all get the same phonics program. And the answer was, no, it didn't matter. 25% still don't pass kindergarten or 1st grade if your instruction goes to phonics, because phonics goes straight to the letters. But remember, the predictor of dyslexia is not anything to do with letters. The predictor of dyslexia is the phonological processing skills. So then the last group We started all the instruction training at the phonological processing group using that now Foundations for Speech, Language, Reading, and Spelling program, which is basically a much more advanced version of what the Lindenwoods built in 1969. They wrote a program in 1969 called Auditory Discrimination in Depth. We took that program and began modifying it, changing it, and built it into a stronger program. And when they got that speech processing program first, and then it went to decoding second, and then it went to sight word skills third, and then it went to paragraph reading later, you followed a developmental hierarchy, we got 91% of those kids to be passing kindergarten and first grade. And again, what's the outcome down the road? The outcome is, in second grade, their reading accuracy and their reading speed. Both are equally strong. 2 years later in fourth grade, they're still equally strong and they're not struggling in reading accuracy or reading speed. So it was one of the first studies ever to show you can prevent reading problems.